Hello everyone, Ninja here, coming back with a second episode of our Blockbench tutorial. I'm so sorry it's been so long in the making, but I've been really busy, I've had projects to finish off and I've been on holiday. But we're back now, we'll hopefully get these episodes out to you a bit quicker now. But basically today what we're going to be doing is modelling. So, you see we have this lovely husky dog here. This is basically what I'm going to be modelling for you guys today and kind of showing you my process of that. Something to note is that this model will be for Bedrock edition of Minecraft. So here we're talking Windows 10, anything on other game consoles like the Switch, anything with the Minecraft marketplace, because with Everbloom that's typically what I work on, therefore that's kind of the only medium that I work with. So getting right into it. Usually I would do this portion on paper, but I figured I'd like to show you guys. So I just got out Photoshop and a reference image of a husky that I want to, kind of base my model off. And basically what I'm going to show you here is how I break down the husky into different shapes and different cube shapes basically to get it ready for modelling. So first of all, I'm going to start with the main part of the body. Let me just quickly make a new layer, which is this kind of chest area here. As you can see, we have kind of a rectangular like shape here. Now these rectangles aren't going to be perfect in Photoshop, but they obviously will have to be in Blockbench, but it's just give me a rough idea of where everything's going to be going. Then we have another square around about here. Something to note is I am going to try and keep some of the Minecraft blocky style, but I also, will be using some angles just to make it a bit interesting. So we can have another little rectangle down here to complete this belly part. Then we have the butt area, which is another rectangle. This neck area probably has a slightly smaller rectangle. Then you have the head, which will be a square, and then the snout. As you can see, it's not perfect, but it just kind of gives me an idea. And then you'd have an ear here. For the legs, generally I like to look at skeletons as well. Looking at dog skeletons, although kind of gory, they are really helpful to kind of see how the body works together, and it's very helpful for animations to make sure all those joints and all those bones are set out correctly. So if I were to find a skeleton of a dog, I can see that their back legs basically are made of 3 parts. You have part here, down here, and then here as well. So that's basically what I'm going to model here. So I'm going to have the main thigh area, and then this area leading back, and then the lower leg, and then of course the paw. It's fairly similar for the front leg. You have one main bone here and then one down here. Like I said before, you don't need Photoshop to do stuff like this. I usually do this by hand. I usually find it quicker just to kind of draw out a sketch of what I'm modelling, and then over the top I'll draw something like this. And then we have the tail, which I can start off with a slightly smaller rectangle, make a slightly bigger one for the fluffy centre, and then a slightly smaller one at the end. So if I just get rid of this, you can just about see the lines are a bit thin, but you can kind of see what I'm getting at there. If I just put in a new layer and fill it with white, that should make it clearer. So it's obviously very quick, but you kind of get the idea of how everything's made together with a main front area, some angles going towards the back, tail, leg, front leg, head. Those are the main areas. So head, main body, tail, and the 4 legs. So I usually do side on because that's generally easier for me to picture when I work in Blockbench. Usually I work from this side and then I'll do the front, and then I would make sure the top and the back looks the same and looks right. So that's basically my process. So I'm just going to now close this. I don't need this anymore. I have my reference images to the side of the screen. So now I'm just going to get straight on into modelling. So first thing that you're going to want to do is to create a new entity model. Now, like I said, this is purely for Bedrock. You cannot use this for Java, so any of the old editions, basically you can't use this on. They have a different kind of file setup, so this again is for Bedrock, i.e. Pocket Edition, Windows 10, anything with the Minecraft marketplace. So I'm just going to name this geometry.husky, which is just basically a layout which Minecraft kind of needs to register what the model is. We can get more into that later, but I'm just going to confirm that. So a few things that you may notice on my setup which aren't necessarily normal for Blockbench. I have these 2 little things on the side here. If I just create a group called main and then inside add a cube, You'll also see I have a duplicate tool. This is because I work a lot along this axis here. So I'll build up all of one side and then I'll flip it over. So the husky would be facing this way in this situation towards north. Because of that, it's very easy for me to just take this cube, position it wherever. I then will duplicate it and flip it along this x-axis here. So then you can see they're both equally far away from the center line which I'm working along. That just makes it very easy, especially for animals which have the same kind of, legs on both sides, of course. So these three here is what I've customized, which I've just done by clicking these three dots here, pressing customize, and I've just added whatever tool I wanted along this toolbar. So that's basically why you'll see these, and I might use these throughout, but maybe on your screen you don't have them yet, but it's very easy to customize if you want to have the same layout. So most of the time I start with my main body. So I'm going to do that now. Usually I try to make things proportional to the actual size they are in real life. So a husky length is 1 meter long. So in Minecraft, for those of you who don't know, a block, i.e. this little grid here, is one whole block, is 16 pixels across typically, and the equivalent to kind of real life, I guess you could say, is 1 block is 1 meter. That's roughly what you need to know. So this Siberian husky, if it's only 50 centimeters long, will probably only come up to around about here, which isn't very big. So for the purposes of this, I'm going to make the husky a little bit bigger just so it's clearer what I'm doing. So like usual, I start off with the main body. I find an appropriate thickness, make sure it's centered along this X line. Okay, that's fine. Making sure to keep on checking back on my reference, what I just did in Photoshop. So this is probably the main central part of the body. Then if I duplicate that, it will just give me a cube of the same size in the same place. Because I want to add rotations to this, I need to add every new rotation in a new folder. That's really important. So I couldn't just rotate this cube by itself. If I use this rotate tool, I'd have to rotate the entirety of the folder. Now, as you can see right now, it's rotating along 0, 0 at the bottom here. I can actually change the origin of where I want it to rotate around by editing these numbers here and increasing or decreasing however I see fit. Or I can use this new pivot tool that will basically set the origin to wherever I want it. If I press this little button here, it will origin to geometry, which basically just means it would put itself in the center of this cube. So I'm going to just put it roughly where I want to rotate it from, and then I'm going to move this cube out, make it roughly the size I want because it's the front chest area. We saw this was a bit larger and it's also a bit wider. Again, I'm trying to go for that kind of blocky feel, so trying to kind of limit the amount of rotations I use. And now I'm going to adjust the pivot tool, and then I can freely rotate however I want. I can rotate it in blocks of 15 degrees, or I can press shift and rotate it in much larger values for 45, or I can do control, which will allow me to rotate it at 1 degrees. These are all shortcuts which are really helpful. You don't need to know them all right now, but they are time savers. So I'm going to rotate this roughly how I want it, move it around a bit, keep on looking at my reference images. That's always really important to have good references. So once I have that roughly how I want it, I can move it around by using these axes here. So where the arrow is pointing is along which direction you're going to be moving it. Again, if I press control, I can get varying amount of accuracy. So control will move it by 0.1 pixels, shift is 0.25, and if I hold shift and control at the same time, it will do 0.05. Depends how you have it set up, but that's at least how the default is and how I have it set up. So now I want to add this kind of lower area, try and give it the belly. So for this, I'm just going to duplicate this cube again. I can either do this by right clicking on where it is in this kind of list here, press my duplicate tool, or I can actually right click directly onto the cube. It all depends how you prefer. So I'm going to make this a bit smaller. It needs to be in its own cube again because I want a different rotation. So this is going to be the belly. I'm going to adjust the pivot tool, and then I'm going to rotate it. At the moment this dog is a bit chunky, so I'm just going to make it a little bit smaller, move it back into the middle, make the belly a bit smaller too, use my center X to quickly just click it into place down the center. And there you have kind of the main body going on. We need the kind of rear end area. To do that, again, I'm going to add I'm going to duplicate this. I think I want it on the same rotation, so it doesn't need to go in its own folder unless I want to organize it like that. So you can see there's a bit of flickering here. This is called Z-fighting. It's where the texture of these two cubes are actually overlapping each other. Because of that, both textures are trying to kind of basically fight to be seen. So you get this weird kind of flickering effect. Very simply, all I have to do is either move this slightly to make sure that they're no longer overlapping. I can change the size of this or the position. I can move it towards the end so it doesn't flicker anymore. Or I can use this handy little inflate tool. Now the inflate tool will basically add whatever value you have in here to the side of this cube. Something I will note is at the moment you can see all my sizes are whole numbers. Please, please, please do not use 0.1s in this or 0. Whatever. Do not use decimal points, as this can really mess with your texture and your UVs, which I'll get onto in the next video. If you want a slightly larger size than this, so if you want it 0.1 larger, you can use this inflate tool. So if I want it to be 0.1 larger on all sides, I would move this to 0.05 and then it will add down every single side. So there you have it. You can see that it no longer is fighting and it's not that much bigger, so it's not really off-putting. Then I'm just going to adjust and play with that until I find a shape that works for me. So now I'm going to give the bud area a bit smaller at the end. At the moment it's a bit big and a bit bulky. As you can see, because I've adjusted these sizes to be 0.15, whenever I move it, it's now slightly off, so I can't get these to line up very easily. A good way of doing that is to use this vertex snap tool. What I can do with this is basically select any corner of any cube. So for example, this cube here, I'll press this and then I can move it to whatever corner I want. So example, if I wanted to move it to this corner and have these two corners meet, I could just click this one now. I'm going to click this one to make sure these line up very well, and as you can see, there's now perfectly lined up without me having to fiddle about with moving it myself. Make sure this is also centered like always, and I'm going to make it a lot smaller to try and give a more rounded end, I guess. There we go, we'll go with that for now. So now I think I'm going to actually do this back leg because that can give it a lot of form. So I'm going to make a new group entirely, call it back left leg. No capitals or no spaces within these names, by the way guys. It can mess with how Minecraft reads it, so just make sure you have no spaces, no capitals. Inside this I'm going to create a new cube, which is handily coloured green so I can differentiate it from the main body, which is blue at the moment. Looking back at my reference, I have one larger cube here, so that's what this one's going to be. This is going to be the thigh area. Again, always adjusting my pivot points. This also makes it easier later down the line if I wanted to animate it. Having everything already in place pivot wise is a lot easier. So now I kind of have that upper thigh region kind of how I want it at least. I can now move on to the lower legs. So I'm just going to duplicate this and put it in a new group, which I'm going to call lower back left leg. As you can see, it's now rotated this way. I don't want it rotated this way, I want it rotated more towards that angle. So again, I adjust the pivot point from where I want it to rotate around, make sure it's in its own group, and then I can rotate it freely. This lower leg's a lot thinner, so that's what I'm going to reflect here. So again, I think this is slightly not a perfect size, so I'm going to use the inflate tool to get it a little bit smaller without using decimal points. So once I think that's roughly there, I will then duplicate this again, put it in a new group, which I'm going to call lowest back left leg. So this is going to be the final area down here to the ground before I add the paw. Again, I'm going to reset my pivot to the end of this. Again, this is the thinnest part of the leg, so I need to make it slightly smaller. Maybe not that small, I actually think it's a bit too small now, so I'm going to use this inflate tool. I'm just going to keep on fiddling around with different sizes, different angles. That's what I usually do for quite a while after I've got the main bones down. So looking at it now, I actually think I'm breaking it down into too many parts. So very easily, if I make a mistake like that and I think, actually, I just want this leg to be broken into two, I can just remove the cube I don't want. Now I have this extra folder. Very simply, all I have to do is right click and press resolve, and it will get rid of that folder for me. Now I kind of have the freedom to just work with 2 cubes instead of the third, which I think will suit better for the Minecraft style anyway. Also, a good tip is if you press Z on your keyboard when using Blockbench, you can kind of get this kind of see-through effect, just like this, so you can see through all the cubes and just get the wireframe grid, which is very helpful for kind of seeing cubes inside other cubes, where they hit them, you know, stuff like that. So if you ever see me doing that, it's because I've pressed Z. So I'm just going to keep on adjusting until I kind of feel like it's correct. Moving this down so it hits the grid. There you go. Like I said before, usually to start off with, I usually focus on the side, but it is helpful to also make sure the thickness generally is also correct. Now I'm going to look at the front leg, which again I'm just going to separate into 2 main bits. So I'm actually just going to duplicate this back leg so it has the right setup and just correct it to front left leg. Lowest back, front left leg. I'm going to move this forward, adjust it to be the front leg, so make them slightly smaller. So I'm going to go for quite a thick blocky style, I think, for this one, which is kind of how it's turning out, so I'm going to go with that. It's fun to kind of experiment with different styles and different kind of looks. Generally they all, at least for me, I try to make them suitable for Minecraft still, so a few angles maybe, but that's about it. I think it makes it more interesting if you try different things. So I think I might add a very slight bend to this front leg just to make it feel more natural. So I'm going to adjust the pivot, holding down Control as I rotate this to get small increments. Same with this bottom leg. I now want it to sit flat, so I'm going to rotate it forward a little bit. There we go. That's kind of getting there now. I'm going to move this forward a little bit. And now it's time for the kind of neck area and then the head. So again, I'm going to want a new folder within this main area for the neck. So I'm going to duplicate this. I'm going to call it neck. It's a lot smaller, obviously. And because I also want it in its own rotation, I'm going to change the pivot center to around about here. And then I'm going to rotate it. I then may have to add another neck section to try and make it the correct angle for the head, but for now I'm going to leave it as that, I think, and I'm going to move on to the head, and then I can adjust that later on. So the head is obviously connected to the neck, so I'm going to duplicate this, make a new group inside this neck bone, and I'm going to call it head. Again, I want to use a new pivot rotation, so I'm going to have it around about here, rotate how I want. I'm going to have the head a bit bigger than usual to give it kind of more of a style. So I think the head looks about right up there. So I will have to extend this neck portion. Looks a bit like a sheep right now, in my opinion anyway. So I'm going to duplicate this neck area, make it slightly smaller as it builds up towards the head. They're very pretty dogs, aren't they? I like a good husky. I've always wanted one. Then I want this snout nose, which is quite a long snout, I guess. Looking at it, I can see like everything is, the legs are pretty big, so just trying to scale them down proportionally so they don't look so out of place. And they have quite tall front facing ears, so I'm going to make those 2. I'm actually going to put them in their own group because I want to animate these later. To animate, I need it to be in its own group so it can have its own rotations. I think these are slightly turned outwards, so I'm going to turn them slightly outwards as well. I'm going to change my pivot point, of course. Then I'm also going to copy across the right ear. Obviously right now they're a bit too close together, so that's going to take some adjusting. I'm actually going to add a little nose in there as well. Usually I wouldn't model down to this kind of detail, I'd usually just texture this detail on, but I actually want to have the nose move at a later point, and to do that it needs to have its own cube and its own folder. The same goes for the snout actually, I should do that in its own little cube. I'm going to set the pivot tool now to make it easier later on. I'm going to put the nose in the snout. So when I move this snout, the nose moves too. Perfect. I'm also going to adjust the pivot of the nose now to make it easier. I could even tilt the snout a little bit if I wanted. Make sure it extends all the way back. There we go. I think this front chest area is a bit big at the moment, so I'm going to make that a bit smaller. Just all adjusting just these little bits when I've got like the kind of the main form. You know, once I've got the main form down, it's a lot easier to adjust the proportions and make sure everything is looking right. Something I need to make sure I don't forget is the tail. As you can see, all of this is open right now and it's, you know, it really gets in the way. So an easy way to counteract that is by right clicking and just saying collapse groups. And everything collapses and it's all nice and tidy, so I don't have to keep on scrolling up and down. So here I'm going to have the tail. I'm going to create a new cube, which is nice and orange this time. Now, in my original plan, I was going to make the tail out of 3 parts, so we'll see how that looks. I'm not sure if that's how I'm going to continue, but I'm just going to adjust this pivot point like always remember, because I usually forget. The first section, tail middle, to get the second section. Adjust my pivot again. See, this is what happens when you don't adjust your pivot before adjusting it. It gets all funky like this. So now I'm just going to have to adjust my pivot right. Then I can move this cube back into position. See, that's a little lesson for you. And now my pivot is in the right area, my cube's in the right area, and I can rotate it. And then I'm going to make it a little bit longer before adding the end portion of this tail. So tail end. Adjusting my pivot to roughly where I want it before moving my cube. I'm just going to look around, give it a quick check, see if I think any proportions are off in comparison to my reference image. I think we're all getting there. The back legs generally are a bit thicker, but when I do make it thicker, it kind of, I'm not sure on that look, so maybe I'll change that at a later date. I think I'll go with this for now. I think I might make the head a bit bigger to give it more of a cartoony, blocky feel. So once I've kind of checked from front on if that's kind of the right thickness, I think it's kind of there. Maybe a little bit too thin. I think generally it's not far off. So move these legs out a little bit, make sure they're pronounced enough. Then very simply, to finish it off, I'm just going to duplicate these legs. So I'm going to duplicate it and flip it. Check to see if they're an appropriate distance apart. I think that's about right. Obviously rename this new leg. We don't want 2 front left legs, we want a front right leg. And we're going to do the same for the back leg. So duplicate it and flip it. Back right leg. There we go. And I think for at least a model, that's kind of done for me. So now I'm basically just going to do my final checks that everything looks good from all angles, nothing's off-centered, that all looks fine. There might be a little bit of an issue here because this doesn't quite go all the way up to the head, which looks a bit strange. I think that looks better already. I'll check some pivot points to make sure that they're roughly okay, so when I get to animating, it's a lot easier. Make sure everything is named correctly, there's no double naming that can cause issues. Yep, from the looks of it, that's all okay from my end. So with that, I would like to consider this model complete. Obviously I may come back to it, make a few couple adjustments, but I'd say from here, it's ready for the next stage, which is texturing, which will be on our next tutorial video. Again, I'll say it one last time, this model is for Bedrock Edition, not Java. It's a completely different system if you want to go for Java. I'm going to make this snout a bit thicker actually, I'm going to interrupt myself. Thank you guys very much for watching though. We'll get the next video out very soon, which is all about texturing. So we're basically just going to colour this nice husky in. We're going to do all the little details and I'm going to tell you all about creating your UVs and your textures. So that'll be the next video. Be sure to subscribe, like, notifications on, etc. You know the drill. Be sure to follow us on Twitter at everbloomen. And me personally, Ninja, if you want to see more of my models, you can check out my own Twitter at NinjaMasterMC. Links are all below. A shout out to Janice, the creator of Blockbench. Without him, this wouldn't be possible because this program wouldn't exist. Again, a link to Blockbench will be in the description. Once I finish this kind of tutorial process, I will be allowing the files to be public. So you guys will be able to download it yourselves and have a look at it. I don't think we'll be just yet. You'll have to wait till the kind of the later animation videos or the implementation. Until then guys, thank you for watching and I'll see you next time.